Today's video, we're going to talk about Shopify versus Google Analytics versus Google Ads analytics data. Don't pay attention to Shopify's data if you want to know how well your ads are working and in general, okay? So I have hard numbers here that I'm going to share from a couple different clients in a couple different industries to give you an idea of just how much our sales are tracked when we look at Google Ads versus what's shown inside our account on Google Ads versus Shopify versus Google Analytics 4, as well as, by the way, same thing being from Bing Ads compared to Shopify versus GA4, as well as Facebook Ads versus Shopify versus GA4, so you can, or Google Analytics, so you can see how much of a difference in how these platforms track the same, presumably same sales, and how they undercount on one versus the other. Okay, so the main thing here is Google Analytics 4 is always going to count way less than what the ad platforms are going to count. Shopify is going to tend to undercount, I should say, what the ad platforms are also going to count, but not as much as what Google Analytics is going to undercount. Why is this important? Well, of course, if you're making decisions about whether you should go up in ad spend or maintain it or reduce it, you want to know how well your ads are working. You got to have really good data. The best data you're going to get, bottom line, is inside the ad account. And it's not just because it's taking credit for other sources. It's because the ad platforms are the best at figuring out when somebody actually clicks on an ad and buys. I mean, that's frankly what they do. But you may say, well, Google Analytics, why doesn't Google Analytics do as good a job as Google Ads in tracking the Google Ad sales? And that is because of attribution differences. That is, how they count the sales is different in Google Analytics than what you're going to find through Google Ads. So, for that matter, this is also why it's very important, by the way, to track all the sales you possibly can and leads if you're doing lead generation on your e-commerce site as well in your ad accounts, because it will determine how much you're making with your ads, given that all that data helps you make better decisions and it goes to train the algorithm so that the algorithm understands what's working, what's not, and can scale your ads accordingly. And the ad platform is what's important, not Shopify, not GA4, even though I like to use Google Analytics or Google Analytics 4 as a backup source of information, specifically so I can see if the ad account is not performing correctly in terms of the tracking. So we'll set up goals in Google Analytics 4 and we'll find out what's that ratio of sales that it undercounts compared to the ad platform. So in other words, Google Analytics 4 may undercount 50% of what Google Ads undercounts, so to say. And in that situation, we know that's what's normal. We know checking our goal in Google Ads in terms of what's tracked there, we can tell whether that goal is working or not because it should normally count around twice as much as what Google Analytics tracks. And then we know if the goal is broken, which is important because goals a lot of times don't track 100% or 0%. Sometimes they just intermittently track and you have to get this set up right. Not to mention, if you're running any kind of PMax campaigns, Google Analytics data is used to power the PMax campaigns. A lot of people don't know that, and I found out the hard way when Google Analytics doing some optimization there, changing stuff, our PMax results go into the crapper once we did that. So that's something else to consider or should consider when you're trying to make PMax campaigns work. That is, you want to have Google Analytics set up the right way as well, in addition to any tracking you have set up in Google Ads as well. And then finally, with all that, if you set up tracking in Google Analytics and you import those goals into Google Ads, that same goal will track differently, typically in Google Ads, as it shows in Google Ads, than what it's going to show in Google Analytics, given that the attribution is different in Google Ads for the same exact goals as what it is in Google Analytics 4. I have some other key facts that I want you to know, but I'm going to go through the data first of all, so I can first of all show you how much of a difference the data for the same exact traffic is going to track differently whether you're looking at Google or Bing or Facebook ads compared to Shopify, and then versus Google Analytics at the end of the day. With the key thing here being that the actual amount of what your average transaction size is going to dictate how much undercounting that these other platforms are going to do compared to the ad platform itself. All right. So we have a wakeboarding supplies company here. With that wakeboarding supplies company, we ran Google ads, Bing ads, and Facebook ads. Whereas Google ads showed, and this was a 30-day time span, 94,000 in sales. Google ads was showing in Shopify, as a result, 91,000 in sales. Okay, so it undercounted by about 4 or 5%, which is pretty typical for something that sells for an average transaction size of $287 itself. So, because a lot of the people who get to your site from your ad, from your Google Ads campaign, they're going to come back and buy later. That said, Shopify is going to use cookies to cookie the user. So if they come back on another visit, Shopify is going to be able to still attribute that sale to the Google Ads campaign. And then in the reporting in Google Ads, the marketing tab, it'll still say it's coming from Google Ads. However, on Google Analytics, it's set up for last click attribution. So whereas Google Ads and Shopify have similar attribution methods, that is, it uses data-driven attribution, it ultimately doesn't use first click or last click. First click being, what did they click on first? That gets credit for the sale versus last click. Whatever they clicked on last, wherever they came from last gets the credit for the sale. Data-driven attribution, which both of these use now, basically a combination thereof as a simple way to explain it. Google Analytics has last click attribution set up. And with that, you're going to have 48K worth of sales itself compared to the 94K in sales that we had showing in Google Ads. Okay. So it's a huge difference in the data from Google Ads versus Google Analytics 4 and Shopify versus Google Analytics 4 as well. Because at that kind of price point, $287, there are a lot of people who are coming back and not buying on the first visit. In fact, most people overall who come to our site from our Google Ads campaign are not going to buy on the first visit. They're initially there and then they're going to come back at a later point in time. It's less than half. Now, as far as Bing ads go, if you're wondering how much Bing is able to track compared to Shopify and Google Analytics 4, that same company, we had 22K in sales. Shopify showed 17K in sales. Shopify was able to track less of our revenue than what Bing was able to track. Or you could say Bing or Microsoft was overcounting, if you want to say that, of which I don't have directly ways to verify if Shopify is undercounting or Bing ads is overcounting. I can tell you I've done a little bit of study on it, and for the most part, it's Shopify looking like it's undercounting, not Bing overcounting. And Google Analytics in that situation for Bing ads was saying 9K. So ultimately, the percentage of undercounting on Google Analytics 4 was about the same on Bing versus Google. So the platform itself didn't change the percentage of undercounting that it did itself. Bing ads, though, was undercounted at a higher percentage on Shopify than it was undercounting Google ads traffic, if that makes sense. And then, of course, for Facebook ads, same wakeboarding supplies company, we had 41K a month in sales on Facebook ads showing, whereas in Shopify it showed 31K, so it undercounted even more. And GA4 was showing only 4K in sales from our Facebook ads. Because with Facebook, it's unlike search engines, people are clicking on that ad and they're not willing to buy right away because they weren't ready to buy. They weren't actively in buying mode. Facebook campaigns, a lot of people think they don't work. The reality is the attribution also window is not very as big itself. You have 7-day attribution versus with Google, you can change it, but I'm going to have a default at 90 days instead. So we're giving ourselves a longer chance for the customer to come back itself. And that's also why it's undercounted so much, but more so on the side of just people from our Facebook campaign were putting the idea in their head. They got to wait for payday to come in order to decide to buy or do some research or whatever, and they're not going to buy on that first visit at all. So that shows you kind of the difference in data by platform, by traffic source, what you can kind of expect and what's normal for what you see in the ad account versus Shopify versus GA4. Now, if you want to get a second idea or a second example of how these platforms track differently, I have a beard supplies company. So like beard oil, mustache oil, and stuff like that. So we're talking about on Google Ads here for a $41 average transaction size, 189K in monthly sales on Google Ads showing, whereas Shopify showed 181. So it was actually really close. We're talking within plus or minus 4%. And then GA4 showed 161K. Now, why did GA4 track so much closer to Google Ads than what we have with the wakeboarding supplies company? Well, that has everything to do with the average transaction size. The lower the average transaction size, the closer the ratio of the ad platform itself on Google is going to show to Google Analytics data for that same traffic source, that is Google Ads. Because more people are going to be willing to buy right away. They don't need to think about it as long. The same thing is going to apply to other traffic sources. For Bing ads, we had 13K in monthly sales. Shopify was showing 10K, a little more than what it undercounted on Google up here, same thing down here. And then Google Analytics 4, we showed 11K in sales. And if you're wondering why it showed more sales in Google Analytics 4 than Shopify, I don't really know. It seemed like a little bit of a glitch of some sort, but realistically speaking, most of the people were buying within 7 days at least, and they're not switching devices before they buy. Because even though with up here, it tracks up to 90 days, a lot of people switch devices before buying, and that also screws up some of your attribution as well, and you always got to consider that. Not to mention, by the way, with ad blockers nowadays, upwards of 30% of the sales that you get are going to not be tracked as well. Because if somebody comes back to the site and they buy on a second visit, the sale's not going to be tracked, even though you try to cookie the user's browser. The user's browser won't be cookied if they're using a privacy browser or using an ad blocker, of which makes routinely your tracking in these ad platforms easily undercounted by a good 30%, if not more, depending on more so with more expensive products or higher average transaction sizes because of these two things. And, roughly 10 to 20% of people use a privacy browser like Brave that doesn't allow, cookies. And then you also have 30% of people using an ad blocker, prevents cookie code from being dropped on the user's browser. So it's something else to consider here, which is the bane of my existence, by the way, because at our agency all the time, clients will tell me, hey, Corey, I want to have a 10-to-1 sales ratio of sales to ad spend at our firm. And I got to tell them, hey, because of ad blockers and all this stuff, because we're not using server-side tracking, which would fix this, your 10-to-1 is really like a 14-to-1. But they don't believe it. They don't want to believe it, or they refuse to believe it, or whatever. It is what it is. It's easier for me to say that. I've looked at hundreds of accounts. I see this. And server-side tracking, obviously fixes a lot of that. But it doesn't fix all of them either. Because if a person switches devices and they're not logged into their Google account or logged into their Facebook account, that purchase is lost as well. So conversion tracking is always going to undercount. The question is how much. And so if you're trying to gauge an effectiveness of an ad campaign based upon figuring out if it gets a certain ROI for your business, looking at the inherent tracking in any one of these three, you're going to be working off faulty information, which is why for an e-commerce company, you typically want to track and figure out a certain ratio of total sales in the company to total ad spend. And then your goal should be to raise the ad spend as quickly as you can maintain that ratio. And that accounts for all the sales that your ads are bringing in, not just some of them, because they all have inherent flaws in how they track because of everything I mentioned. Getting back to what I was mentioning here, Facebook ads, we track 72,000 in sales on Facebook itself, 59K in Shopify, and then 29K in GA4. So even though the transactions costs were low, Facebook ads are tracked very effectively, nevertheless, in GA4 or Shopify. So anyway, it gives you some general idea of kind of how the data ends up and the differences between the data in one platform versus the other, if you're trying to figure out if your tracking is broke in any one of these three places. Like I said, the most important thing is that you optimize your ads based upon as good a data as possible. And the way that you do that is you set up your ads with the best tracking, server-side tracking being the best nowadays, and you track as many things as you can. So not just cart purchases, offline purchases, phone calls, form fills, similar to that if you want the best results tracked. So the ad platform has the most data to work with, but making sure you set all this up and then maintaining it, that is constantly keeping an eye on the amount of conversions coming through compared to what GA4 is showing. Because if the tracking breaks, that ratio of what GA4 shows versus what the ad platform shows for each one of these individual goals change. And then you'll know something's up. So anyway, that's, if you will, the numbers. Now, some other key things I wanted to mention here is you can change attribution methods in Shopify. So if you want to switch to last click or first click, instead of using this data-driven attribution, so it's similar to what you see in GA4, and wanted to get GA4 to match Shopify, you just switch to last click attribution itself. You obviously can change attribution methods on the ad platforms itself as well if you really wanted to. I don't recommend doing that. I recommend data-driven attribution. That's where you're going to get the most results. Why is that? Because at least if you're a real pro like me, you're going to set up ads that are going to be higher in the funnel, mid of funnel, down at the bottom of the funnel. So you'll have a brand campaign for the people that are just coming back to buy at the last second. Then you'll have campaigns where people are typing in like, buy pottery wheels. Then you'll have campaigns that target, what are the best pottery wheels for sale? You know, potentially later on, also, once you've made enough money and you want to scale some more, you set up a campaign targeting people looking at videos about pottery wheels, slash pottery techniques and all that. And the point is, ads that go after people that aren't quite ready to purchase, they are what nets also the whole chain of events to happen there. That is for them, but it took a series of ads working together to get the most results out of your market. So you don't want brand campaigns taking all the credit. You want the campaigns that targeted people first to get most of the credit, but not only that, each campaign subsequently had its value, it contributed to the sale that you got, and you want Google to kind of like have the campaigns work together as a unit, so to say. You'll make the most money that way with your account, and you start with the bottom of your funnel first. You get your bottom of your funnel efficient, and then when you're making money, you invest in getting people a little bit further up, a little bit further up, a little bit further up, and eventually you target people that are just enthusiasts with a good ad that tries to get them to the site. And then you get them to the site, then you remarket to them, and you have that then. And then you have ad campaigns that remarket to people, of course, and after they purchase to get more lifetime value out of the customer. So you have different campaigns for different people based upon where they're at. And that's how you really make a lot of money in your market. And then Amazon itself can suck data away from your campaign. So one thing for e-commerce companies is, and if you, of course, have an Amazon store, you'll advertise to people on Google, and then they'll go and buy an Amazon at the last second. And this can be anywhere from 10 to 40% of your sales, ultimately at the end of the day, from what we found out. So Amazon looks like hot shit. Google doesn't, even though they started out on Google, they got to your site, and then they finished the purchase on Amazon so they can get it quicker, and they felt more confident doing it there because they know Amazon's not going to rip them off. And you got to know this. So, and then with that, I'd be looking at Google and Amazon as a package. They both helped contribute to getting you the sale, and you wouldn't have got it otherwise a lot of times, because if you didn't have Amazon, they weren't going to put an order through on a website they never heard of for a $20 item. And weirdly enough, the cheaper the item, the more likely somebody isn't willing to put their credit card information in on a new site they've never done business with before. It would make sense for a more expensive one, that would be the case, but that's not how it is. I guess they think about it as, I'm not going to cough up my information that could potentially get stolen or lost for a $20 thing. I don't need that much. So, a couple other things here. Before I get into that though, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, you absolutely should. I have all the best information on how to make money with ads on this channel. Everything you need, from tracking, like I'm talking about here, to ad copywriting, to the campaign types that work, the tricks, the tips. And it's coming from somebody who spends 40 hours a week doing ad strategy at our firm to find out what works. A lot of the information you find online, if not most of it, is given to you by people who don't really run any ads. They're just talking about it. And therefore, the information is useless as a result of that, because you got to be doing it to know really what's going on. I do this. I spend 80 hours a week working. Half of which has to go to the channel. Half of it goes to working on ad strategy. And all I do is just the strategy on our clients' campaigns. And so I testing is all I do. So if you want to know real information, you want to subscribe to this channel as a result. You'll be a multi-millionaire doing the stuff that I mentioned on this channel and executing on it the way that I say. Furthermore, I got a great blog on my site at guaranteedppc.com/blog, where you can find step-by-step information on how to make money with your ads, where I documented everything that you need to do it with screenshots, with everything you need there. With that said, if you have any individual questions that I think that I should have covered here and didn't, or in general have marketing related questions, you can contact me several ways. One of which, you can find a link in the video description for a Discord group that I run, and I'm in there answering questions. I also answer everybody who asks a question in the comment section. I also, of course, will respond to you if you reach out to through my site at guaranteedppc.com. Of which, if you reach out to me through Guaranteed PPC, you can ask me a one-off question, or if you are interested in having me just do your strategy for you, you can get on a consulting or coaching call with me. I work with agency owners and companies alike. There are plenty of them. But I also have a done-for-you service where I'll just run your ads for you. I'll set them up within your account, of course. It's your account. And I'll make sure you get the certain result that you're looking for. Otherwise, I won't take a management fee, which will tell you where I'm at in terms of our ethics and what we do here at an agency. No other ad agency I still know of will offer you that kind of guarantee, which tells you the type of quality and skill level we have at our agency with the stuff that we have on this channel, and because it works. So if you're interested in that, reach out to me and I'll give you an 8-quarter projection of your results, of which there'll be a guarantee tied to it, and you'll know what we can do. I also have ad templates available. If you are in a market that we've been in before, instead of figuring out all the stuff that we had to figure out, buy the template from us. I can sell you the ad template, the landing page template, the campaign template that works for your niche market. And you, as a result, you literally just copy paste the results that we got in your account, the results that we got in another city or country that you're in. And, you didn't have to spend all the money ultimately that we had to go through and spend for testing. And you get the multi-million-dollar result for yourself at the end of the day with none of the work. So anyway, if you're interested in a template, let me know as well. I've got hundreds of templates and hundreds of different niche markets because I've been operating this firm now for over a decade. And I can tell you the results you're going to get with it up front. So, for that matter, getting back to what I was mentioning here, server-side tracking, as I mentioned before, will improve your platform's data results by 10 to 20%. If you use enhanced conversion tracking now on Google Ads, 10%, if not 20%. So, as I mentioned, all ad platforms undercount. It's just a matter of how much. It'll undercount more with a higher average transaction size and less with a lower average transaction size. And for that matter, if you have a high transaction cost, easily you're going to be getting 20% more for sure with server-side tracking. Server-side tracking is not, easy to set up for somebody who's never done it before. It is for somebody who has. But it's 100% worth it because that extra 20% of data isn't going to just make you a little bit more money. It's going to make you a lot more money, particularly because the conversions that are lost are typically going to be the bigger ones on average, and Google's not seeing them. Same thing with the other platforms, by the way. And it's going to optimize for the smaller purchases, given that the bigger purchases typically take longer for people to decide to do, and those are the ones that are lost statistically more often, and so you're going to optimize for smaller customers instead of bigger ones. So that's something you really want to, out of all the stuff you can do, it's one of the most straightforward, easy ways for you to make more money is switching to server-side tracking. And then also, offline conversion tracking will increase data 10 to 100% in itself. So offline conversion tracking data, meaning if somebody purchases offline through the phone, you don't take every order through the cart. In that situation, you want to track and take those sales that occur offline and import them in your ad account into a separate goal so you can track both the cart sales and add that to the offline sales that you're getting so that the ad platform, again, can optimize on the full amount of data. Otherwise, it's going to make a ton of errors and just ultimately stagnate because it doesn't understand, why a keyword was working one day and it wasn't working another day, because ultimately the person put their order today, put their order through the phone, and then now the campaign thinks that now the campaign doesn't work and backs off. All that can be avoided if you just get the offline sales into the account as well. Of which, you can't just, by the way, take a phone call and somebody wants to order over the phone. If you can't just put your own order or the customer's order through your cart yourself, because that'll break the data as well. So, and some of the customers are gonna, you're gonna want to tell them, hey, put your order through the cart app, because they'll call, they'll ask a question. You're gonna say, great, if you're ready, go ahead and put your order through the cart. You're gonna lose sales doing that. People will say, yeah, I'll put it through the cart, and then, honey, did you wash the dishes? And then all of a sudden, the person forgot to put the damn order through the cart. So you want to lock down that order. You're going to lose 10% of the sales or more just from people saying they're going to put the order through, and then something else happens, or they say they're going to do it later or whatever. Take the order over the phone. You say, hey, also you can say, hey, if you put the order through right now, I'll give you an extra 5% off, and you'll get, that'll help out. Even though you can say the same thing with the cart and give them a discount code. Bottom line, you'll make more money every time on average locking down the order and putting it through over the phone for them, because it takes effort. I mean, you underestimate how much effort it takes to put your credit card information in. Even if it's saved on your PC, still work to do. And anytime you have to make the consumer work harder to order, you're going to end up with less orders, bottom line. So with that said, offline conversion tracking goes a long way. And God help you, by the way, if you're trying to do e-commerce nowadays without no phone sales, because people don't trust e-commerce companies. It's hard enough getting them to trust you enough to put their credit card into a website they don't know of, or a brand they've never heard of before, let alone there's no phone number on the site that they see. They can ask a question, or if they were trying to ask a question, God help you, and they don't see his number, then you're not getting the order. Literally speaking, if a client wants us to guarantee results, and I don't see that they have a phone number on their site, I'm either not going to do it, or I'm going to tell them you're going to get half the results that I normally would get on this project, because it's really that different. So you got to have a phone number, you got to track the calls, you got to track the sales that come from the calls. Or if you're not taking orders over the phone, you at least track the calls to give the system more data to work with, because somebody who calls is a person that's more likely to purchase, and the algorithm that the ad platform has can use that data to get you more results. The more stuff that you track that is correlated with purchases, the more results you get. And that's why I say you should track add to cart, cart views, checkout views, and purchases, because that gives you even more data to work, the system, the more data to work with. Even though you have these extra goals, you're not optimizing for them actively. They're set up as a secondary goal, but just for the fact that they're set up as a secondary goal will help the campaigns. We've tested this, it helps a bunch. So you want to do this as well. Anyway, that's a general overview in terms of the results you're going to get, in terms of the data on one platform versus another, on the ad platform versus Shopify versus GA4. Hopefully that was useful to you, and I'll see you in the next one. If you want to see another video, click here. It is one of my best ones.